All right, we're continuing in chapter 7 with slide number 39. We're going to talk about regional integration, and this is a way that countries basically work together in the form of basically reducing the barriers of trade amongst other nations. Again, the idea is all of us is stronger than one of us is kind of the logic there. So we'll talk about basically the least integrative to the most integrative. So the first one is basically a simple free trade agreement. And so countries basically agree to eliminate barriers to trade amongst one another. Again, NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is a good example of that. A more integrative version is something called the customs union. And that's when countries basically agree to eliminate trade barriers, and then member countries adopt common external tariffs toward non-members. And the EU is a good example of that, which was originally formed in 1957. Again, the thinking is that, whereas Germany trying to go it alone, or France trying to go it alone, a number of the European countries tried to join together to go straight up against the United States and other global giants in the global trading sphere. And then the most integrated is something called the economic union. That's the highest form of integration between countries. Member countries eliminate internal trade barriers. They implement a common external tariff. They harmonize economic and social environmental rules and policies. And so after 1992, basically this has been the European Union. After 1992, they adopted a common currency called the euro. So basically, there is by and large almost complete economic integration, but there isn't complete political integration. And that's been one of the fundamental challenges of the European Union is that they're trying to make all of these trade decisions and trying to basically work together in the area of economics. But then you've got internal governance within these nations running up against the governance within Brussels, Belgium. And again, that's a big reason why basically Great Britain pulled out of it, is because they were finding that a lot of what Brussels was deciding was not in the best interests of the nation of Great Britain in general. So they figured, you know what, we'll just go it alone. And obviously very controversial, but I understand part of the logic is that Brussels was controlling like the size of teacups, or teapots rather, and various different things. In other words, they were micromanaging everyday life within Great Britain. And so if it's really true that government derives its just powers from the consent of the governed in our own Declaration of Independence, a lot of the very Brits for whom that declaration was written against basically said kind of the same thing. They said, listen, we don't feel like we've consented to a lot of this governance that's happening within our own country. And so that's a big reason why Brexit happened. And so basically all three forms of these regional integrations violate the GATT treaty, this idea of non-discrimination. In other words, the idea of the GATT treaty was that no nation that joined GATT could impose different levels of tariffs on different countries. In other words, if the United States imposed a 10% tariff on Italy, it would also have to impose a 10% tariff on Britain and Germany and all these other countries. What's happening within these trade unions is they are favoring the members of the trade union with lower tariffs, but then imposing larger tariffs on countries that are not a part of this regional integration. But part of what GATT did is it did exempt regional organizations, so that's how they get around it. So if you look at slide number 42, you can see the European Union, and again, the darker blue countries represent many of the older ones. And then the ones that are more like a greenish color are newer members. But you can see how large that is. In fact, they do more trading economically than the United States. Pretty powerful stuff. If you go to slide number 43, it talks more specifically about the European Union. Again, it was formed in 1957 with the Treaty of Rome. The 1992 Treaty of Maastricht changed the name to the European Union. And again, its success has been trade. Okay, it's been very successful in inducing countries to give up elements of their sovereignty for the purpose of trade. Again, what is a good example of giving up their sovereignty? One of which is deferring to the European euro, that form of currency over the individual Deutschmark, or the British pound, or things of that nature. Again, when I was in England studying at Oxford University, I had both pounds and euros that I received when I exchanged, and again, every place I went to would receive both of them. But again, a part of giving up your sovereignty is for the United States, it would be something like giving up the dollar in deference to some other global form of currency. Okay, so the European Union has what's called a supra. Again, outside of nations, outside of all the nations, a supra organization that has a parliament, that has a judiciary, that has an executive branch. And they make decisions that basically compel the other nations to comply. And again, Great Britain basically kind of had enough of that, and they said, listen, we're getting out of that. We don't want them telling us individually what to do. We want to do our own thing. 7%, basically, Europe has 7% of the world's population, but they account for about 20% of global trade. So it's pretty powerful. What are some of the challenges in the European Union? If you look at slide number 44, you can see some of them. They lag in political integration. Again, think of the United States. We've got a central government, the federal government, and then we've got state and local governments. Okay, so in other words, the federal government, what the federal government decides is binding on the state governments as long as it complies with the Constitution and the 10th Amendment and things of that nature. So in other words, the federal government works with the state and local governments. Okay. And so if a federal mandate comes down, the state and local governments have to comply. Again, we're seeing a lot of that with what's going on with this virus implementation, how they're trying to basically address it from the federal government level. If you go over to the European Union, they do not have this type of integration. So sometimes Brussels can tell the individual nations what to do, and they'll do it on an economic level. But on a political level, again, think the problem of immigration coming from African nations, again, in particular, the Middle Eastern nations coming into Europe. Okay, basically the European Union cannot really manage that. It's left to the individual countries to make those decisions. So there's a lack of integration there. There's a lot of tension with external trading powers because, again, in America's case, they're like, listen, Europe's not playing fair. They're giving all kinds of special favors to these countries. They're not giving us any favors when it comes to trade. Part of the challenge they've dealt with is they've favored their own nations, the European nations, but competition with Asian nations has led to cutbacks in workers' rights and social programs. In other words, what they're finding out in a lot of these European countries, they're socialist. And so what I mean by that is there's a very, very, very large social net, where you've got free education and you've got free health care and you've got free vacations, and the government provides a lot of free stuff because of increased taxation. But what's happening is when you increase taxation, the cost of goods goes up as well in the midst of that. And so these Asian nations are basically producing goods a lot cheaper. So in order to compete, these socialist nations that have a very, very large social safety net in place are having to scale back on many of the benefits to these people in order to compete with the Asian countries, okay, with their lower prices. And so that's created all kinds of issues internally with these countries, in these European countries, a lot of the people are disgruntled and upset about that. But again, these are some of the problems. Another problem with the European Union is, even as it's broadening, okay, in other words, you got 28 nations involved within the European Union, it's not very deep, okay? In other words, it's not a very unified group. Perhaps economically, yes, but in a lot of other ways, no, okay? And again, what they call the EU benefit migration. Okay, a lot of these immigrants that are coming into the Europe, they want to enjoy all the benefits of these socialist countries without basically participating perhaps in some of the responsibilities like paying taxes or things like that. So these are the challenges. Another challenge was the global financial crisis of 2008. I can only imagine what kind of challenge they're going to face after this coronavirus challenge kind of cools off. Other challenges, if you go to slide number 48, you can see the European Union in the area of Greece. Greece basically became, financially, their whole system was breaking down. They weren't able to maintain payments into the European Union. They weren't able to, because their economy was breaking down, they weren't able to take care of their own people. And a lot of these socialist policies and the social safety net they had. So they began to ask for aid from the European Union. And so basically what happened is in 2015, Germany said, listen, we won't give you aid unless you develop some sort of fiscal action plan to get your internal house in order. And so the aid was given to Greece, but basically they said, listen, this is the last time that we're going to give you aid. And so, in other words, the problem with the European Union is you've got some nations that financially are not doing well, and they're becoming a financial drain on the European Union fiscal system as aid is given to them and they're not getting their house in order. You're seeing this European Union that is very fractured and is subject to dissolution. There's concerns about that. So anyway, I put a funny video. I was going to show it in class, but you're welcome to take a look at it. It's the Speaker of the British Parliament, John Bercow, as they're debating on Brexit. This was in September, shortly before they had the vote where Britain basically pulled out of the European Union. Actually, it was in January. But you can see some of the strife, and what you kind of pick up in this is some of the strife within Brexit and to pull out of the European Union to stay in. And you also kind of see the unique feature of British politics. And personally, John Bercow, I find him actually hilarious. And so you're welcome to take a look at that video. I think it's kind of fun. Skipping over here, actually, you know what? I'm going to call it quits on that, and I'm going to resume with slide number 47 next time. So see you soon. Take care.